You know, back in 1979, the Iranian Revolution did something incredible. It didn't just get rid of a king. It put in place a political system the world had literally never seen before. And at its very heart is this unique and really powerful theory called Wilayat-e-Faqih, or the guardianship of the jurist. Today, we're going to unpack what that really means, where it came from, and how it continues to shape Iran and, really, the entire world.
All right, so how are we going to break this all down? Here's the plan. First, we'll get a solid definition of what we're even talking about. Then we'll trace its pretty surprising history. After that, we'll see how Ayatollah Khomeini took that history and completely turned it on its head. Then we'll look at how it actually works in Iran today, dive into the serious controversies around it, and finally, ask the big questions about where it's all headed.
Okay, to really wrap our heads around this system, we have to start with a fundamental religious problem it was designed to solve for Shia Islam. This whole thing boils down to a question that goes way, way back to the year 874. See, the 12th Imam, who 12er Shia believe is the divine successor to the Prophet Muhammad, entered what's called the Great Occultation. In simple terms, he was hidden from the world, with the belief that he'll return one day as a messianic figure. So for over 1,000 years, the huge question has been, what do we do in the meantime? Who's supposed to be in charge?
Well, the answer that modern Iran came up with is Wilayat-e-Faqih. The term itself is a combination of wilayat, which means guardianship or authority, and faqih, which is just an expert in Islamic law. So putting it all together, the theory argues that while everyone's waiting for the imam to return, the most learned and just religious scholar should hold both religious and political power.
But here's what's so wild about Iran's system. This idea of a cleric as the head of state is a massive departure from centuries of Shia tradition. I mean, for most of history, the main view was what's called political quietism. Basically, clerics stay out of politics and just wait for the imam. Later, that evolved a bit into a limited guardianship. Maybe a jurist could look after orphans or manage religious endowments, but not run the country. It was Khomeini who brought in this third, truly revolutionary step: absolute guardianship over the entire state.
So, how on earth did we get from clerics who avoided politics at all costs to clerics leading a full-blown revolution? Well, it didn't happen overnight, not at all. It was more like a slow burn, fueled by centuries of political pressure and massive social change in Iran.
And you can see that slow shift play out right here. For almost 1,000 years, ruling was just not the clergy's job. But then as Shiism became the state religion of Iran, their influence started to grow. But the real game changer came in the 19th and 20th centuries. Foreign powers started meddling, and then the Shah began this aggressive push for secularism, which basically forced the clergy into an openly political and eventually confrontational role.
And if you want a perfect example of this newfound muscle, look no further than the tobacco protest of 1891. The Shah gave a British company a total monopoly on Iran's tobacco industry. In response, a top cleric issued a fatwa, a religious decree that basically said using tobacco was an act of war against the hidden imam. The boycott was so immediate and so total that the Shah had to tear up the contract. For the first time, it was crystal clear. The clergy could wield immense political power, sometimes even more than the king himself.
So all of this growing political power, it perfectly set the stage for one man, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. During his long years in exile, he took all these historical threads and wove them together into a revolutionary doctrine that would change Iran and the world forever.
And this right here, this comparison really nails what made Khomeini's ideas so radical. He didn't just say a cleric could rule, no. He argued that it was a religious duty. He said that waiting around for the imam was no longer an option. He claimed that a truly Islamic government wasn't just possible, it was mandatory, and the faqih, the jurist, had to be in charge. Period.
So how did he back this up? Well, he built his case from a few different angles. He reinterpreted religious texts, like one saying scholars are the heirs of the prophets, to mean they also inherit political leadership. He used simple logic. If Islam has laws for everything, then you need a government to enforce those laws, and who better to lead that government than the person who knows the law inside and out? And finally, he went on the attack, declaring that monarchy itself was fundamentally un-Islamic and that the Shah had no right to rule.
And then, after the revolution in '79, this stuff stopped being theory. It became the actual blueprint for the new constitution of the Islamic Republic of Iran, creating this truly one-of-a-kind political structure.
So how does this actually work on the ground? Well, you can think of the system as having two parallel tracks. It's like there are two governments running at the same time. On one side, you've got your elected bodies, a president and a parliament that people vote for. But on the other side, you have the unelected authority, And that's where the real power is. We're talking about the Supreme Leader, or Rahbar, and the very powerful Guardian Council. This dual structure is the key to understanding Iranian politics. It creates this constant tension between what the people vote for and what the theological state wants, and it explains so many of their internal power struggles.
And when we talk about power, just look at what's concentrated in the hands of the Supreme Leader. He's the commander-in-chief of all armed forces, including the super-powerful Revolutionary Guards. He picks the head of the entire judicial system. He controls state TV and radio. He can even dismiss the president that people elected. And he has the final say on all major policies, from the nuclear program to the economy. The president runs the day-to-day government, sure, but it's always under the leader's watch.
So who picks this all-powerful figure? In theory, it's an elected body called the Assembly of Experts. But, and this is a huge but, anyone who wants to run for a seat on that assembly has to first be approved by the Guardian Council. And who's on the Guardian Council? Well, half of its members are appointed directly by, you guessed it, the Supreme Leader himself. It is a self-reinforcing system, and that's by design.
Now, it is absolutely crucial to understand that this theory is not some universally accepted doctrine. Not at all. It's hugely controversial, and the debate isn't just coming from outside Iran, it's fierce within Shia Islam itself.
You see, one of the biggest theological challenges to this idea comes from the other major center of Shia learning, Najaf in Iraq. The most senior clerics there, including the incredibly influential Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, stick to the traditional model. They believe a cleric's job is to guide and advise society, but not to rule it directly. They fundamentally reject the idea that a jurist should hold supreme political power over the state.
And you know who one of the fiercest critics was? The very man Khomeini himself had originally picked to be his successor, Ayatollah Mansuri. Over time, he came to believe that giving a regular, fallible human being the kind of absolute, unchecked power that was meant for a divinely guided imam, well, that was just a dangerous recipe for corruption and tyranny. For saying this, he was sidelined and spent years under house arrest.
And these big theological debates, they lead to some very real, practical criticisms of how the system works on the ground. Critics point to what they call a massive democratic deficit, where the will of the voters can just be overruled. They argue there's a huge lack of accountability, since the leader is in power for life, and they say this concentration of power makes the state rigid, slow, and unable to respond to the real needs of its people.
So all of this brings us to today, because after more than 4 decades, the Islamic Republic and its founding theory are facing a period of profound uncertainty, and it all centers on one unavoidable question.
Think about it. This system has only ever had 2 leaders in its entire history. The handover from Khomeini to the current leader Ali Khamenei was already pretty complex. The next one promises to be even more so. Who could possibly fill this role, and will they command the same authority? This is the great unknown hanging over Iran's future right now.
So what could happen next? Well, most people who watch this closely see it boiling down to one of 3 basic scenarios. The first is just continuity, more of the same. A new, like-minded leader is picked, and the Revolutionary Guards probably gain even more power behind the scenes. The second is some kind of managed reform, where maybe the next leader's absolute power is trimmed back a bit to deal with public anger. And the third, which you can see bubbling up in popular protests, is a more radical change, maybe even a collapse of the system, kicked off by a messy succession crisis.
Which brings us to our final big question. Wilayat-e-Faqih, it was born from 1,000 years of theological debate, forged in political conflict, and implemented through revolution. It created a system that is truly one of a kind. But the question today is this unique mix of divine mandate and popular vote a sustainable model for the 21st century? Or are we watching a revolutionary experiment from the 20th century finally hit its limits? That is a question only time will answer.